Joshua chapter 16, if you have your Bibles this morning, Joshua chapter 16, we're going to be right over there. Last week we spoke about bringing our first fruits and what that meant. And first fruits are defined as our time and our energies and our efforts and our finances. And that we're to bring them unto God and to allow God to use them. And by bringing our first fruits to God, it shows our dependence upon Him and not our dependence upon ourselves. Oftentimes we put our dependence on what I can do and what my capabilities are, and we think that these are my limitations or this is all I can do. And so we also put those limitations upon God, and we forget that sometimes, kids, third grade and down, you are dismissed. Thank you, Will, for raising your hands. Kids, third grade and down. Kids, third grade and down. Don't argue with me. You can go talk to your mother. If she sends you back up, that's fine. But please never do that again, my son. Let me tell you, some days it's hard raising kids, isn't it? Oh. And so sometimes we put these limitations that we have upon God. And God says, hey, if you'll just not put those limitations on me, I'll take you farther than what you can think of. I can take you farther than you can even imagine. And we pick up this story in Joshua chapter 14. And for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about Age to Age is the title of the series. Age to Age. Joshua, as in Joshua chapter 14, there was a man by the name of Caleb. And when we pick up this story here in this chapter, he is 85 years old. But just at the beginning of Joshua, and at the very beginning, a few years before that, when Moses was still alive, when Moses was still leading the children of Israel, he was 40 years old, and he was part of the 12 spies that went into the land. And as we know, the 12 spies went into the promised land. God had brought the Israelites out of Egypt, performed all kinds of miracles. And when they got to this little river, they crossed over it. The 12 spies did. They went into the land. They spied it out. They went from city to city. They come back with these great big grapes that were so big that they were carrying them on a stick between them. And they were just saying how wonderful this land is and how bountiful it is. It's nothing like the desert. It's a land full of milk and honey and prosperous people. And then they turned around and 10 of them said, what? We can't do it. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes. And there's no way that we can overtake them. It doesn't matter what our God has told us. It doesn't matter what He's promised us. And Joshua and Caleb, and they get up and they stand in front of the whole crowd. And they say this, in Numbers chapter 13, we should go up and we should take possession of the land, for we certainly can do it. But the 10 without faith, I love that, but the 10 without faith stirred up the people with horror stories about the land, creating fear and disbelief, and so they rebelled. How often does that oftentimes happen in our lives, within our churches, within our families? And we got this one person or these two people, hey, God can bless us, God will take us, God will provide. And then we've got this group over here saying, no, and it's the group without the faith, and they rebelled. And the sad part is, and this is really what I want to concentrate on, is that for 40 years they were wandering around in the desert. 40 years. And Josh and Caleb, here in Joshua chapter 14, we look and he's 85 years old. And Caleb gets up and he's in front of the whole congregation and he says, man, I'm excited about it. And if you start looking at this passage, I'm not going to read this passage this morning to you, but you look at this passage, but this 85-year-old man gets up and he says, hey, I'm 85 years old, everyone. And he says, I am just as strong and capable, and let's go and let's take over this land that God has. And so, 40 years earlier, this is still the same man. And we would all understand at the age of 85 if he wanted to do what? Patty? Patty's over there giggling. I mean, but there's just some days at the age of 85 you just want to do this, right? And Caleb, we would not have criticized Caleb in any way if he would have said, hey, I just want to kick back. I want to watch the young bucks do this. I don't want to have to be a part of this anymore. But he says, hey, I'm still going. 85 years old. Well, Ray, what does that have to do with anything, with this series? Well, our series is Age to Age. I'd like to tell you a little joke this morning. The grocery store was crowded. The parking lot was equally packed. The older man crept around looking for an empty spot where he could safely park his car. Well, there was this young guy, and he was on the other side of the parking lot, and all of a sudden, the sky parted, and it seemed as if this 85-year-old man all of a sudden saw a prime spot that just had been vacated. He drove right past it, got all set up so he'd be able to back his car safely into this precious real estate. But as he was getting ready to back up, just at that instant, a hotshot 25-year-old had come from clear across to the other side of the parking lot. Tires are squealing and slid right into that parking spot. The 25-year-old man jumped out and says, boy, it's what happens when you're young and fast. The old man, he just kind of grinned and put his car into reverse and gunned it. And then drove forward and gunned it backwards again. He did this 3 or 4 times. He rolled his window down to the young man and said, this is what happens when you're old and rich. Well, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to look at the blessings and the challenges of these 2 generations. I want you to just stop and listen to that for a minute. We're going to listen to the blessings and the challenges of these 2 generations, and that's why we call it Age to Age. Around here, we have been blessed to be able to have a good mix of different ages, which I think brings a great foundation to a congregation. And we've got some things that we're going to roll out that the eldership has been talking about and dealing about and praying about. I am so thankful for these group of men that we're able to work through a lot of things and get a lot of things done that we've needed to get done for a very long time. But we're going to look at these 2 generations. And the Bible has a lot to say about the youth and about the mature. And it even talks about the benefits that come into the interaction between these 2 groups. So in this brief 2-week series, we want to be aware of some of the blind spots that we have sometimes accompanied with the season of life that we find ourselves in. And this church, a church group did extensive research, and they asked hundreds of the mature adults to fill out this questionnaire and send it back in. And then they asked a lot of youth and teenagers and college and young families to fill out some of these things and send it back in. And this is some of the things that they gleaned out of this research. Now, in a balanced, multi-generational church, which I believe that we are in, it allows for discipling to take place. As the mature teach the younger, it also allows for the energy and the vitality of the youth to bring with them to permeate the programming and the spirit of the church. It's never healthy when it is an us versus them mentality. And we can all learn from each other and build each other up. I like the approach of challenging, and I like the idea of the older ones setting the example. And that's what Paul said in Titus chapter 2 and verse 6 and 7. He says, Similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. And Paul encourages the older ones and says, hey, be an example. Encourage the younger ones. Teach them. Be a men of self-control. The older generation of our church have a lot of things to say to us, the younger generation. And these things can bring out the best in the best years when God takes center stage and these things. And Christians' examples and the suggestions of veterans can serve as a springboard to send this church and God's kingdom all around the world to new heights. Solomon says in Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 31, gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained in the way of righteousness. If I had hair, I've been noticing that a little bit more of that gray is coming in. And a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. Well, from the survey, they've tried to emphasize some basic principles. And the first theme is, young people, that I want you to understand, this is why I had our young people stay up here, is because I believe that you can learn something from this. And also, too, we can learn and to be able to teach and to work together. The first thing, one of the things that came in out of this research was the value of people over technology. And technology will keep moving and keep moving forward. And we have the knowledge that technology is part of our lives. Well, you might say, I don't know anything about technology. Well, you've got a phone in your house, right? Or you carry one in your purse or in your pocket. Well, maybe you've got a TV in your house. Well, guess what? You've got technology. And yes, it's moving quickly, and we live in a world where our lives can be dominated by technology. But notice it's not just kids, it's part of our culture. And as a result of that, we need to learn is that we can function with it. A businessman, talking about technology, from Wisconsin was traveling to Florida. Well, he had to leave, and he left, and he decided he was going to send his wife, Jennifer, an email. Well, he pulled up his computer, he logged onto the Wi-Fi at the hotel, he typed out the email and says, hey, it is very nice, I have made it, but it sure is hot down here. And sends it out, but the problem was he sent it to a lady in a whole other state by the same name of Jennifer, but she had just lost her husband 3 days ago. And when she opened up her computer and read, I have made it just fine, honey, but it sure is hot around here. Technology can be good, but technology can have problems. What's funny is, in this survey, is that the youth said they wanted to learn from the older generation how to be less dependent upon technology. The older generation in the survey said, oh, please teach us technology. Help me with my VCR, my DVR, how to set my clock on my microwave, and all of these kinds of issues. But in this survey, several of the older ones have said, set your phones aside, give us your undivided attention, and look us in the eyes. Young people, teenagers, those who will someday have a phone that are our kids. When the older one speaks to you, put your phone away. Put your technology away. Yes, we all know, and I know that you can multitask. That you can listen to mom and dad, that you can listen to grandpa and grandma, and you can be doing this at the same time. But guess what? They don't feel that you can. Be respectful. Look them in the eyes. Give them your undivided attention and pay attention to them. There was a radio broadcast on Focus on the Family. And this Arlene and Gary Chapman had wrote a book called Growing Up Social. And Arlene shared the story about a young man of 18 who had graduated from high school, and his family threw this big party for him. And he was there with the guests, and for the first 10 minutes of the party, this young man was there, and then he went up to his bedroom, closed the door, and began playing on games. No amount of coaxing would be able to get him to come out for the rest of the party. This is a strange world that we live in. Some things are wrong, and we are raising a generation who need to be able to survive face to face, dealing with people. In Matthew chapter 6, you're well aware of the fact that Jesus says not to store up treasures on earth, but to store up treasures in heavens. What makes it to heaven with us is not going to be our iPods or our iPads or our Kindles. It will be people is what makes it to heaven with us. We have a lot to learn from the older generation. One of the senior citizens said this to the younger congregation. What was on her heart? She said, be patient with us. We walk a little slower, but please walk with us. Help us with our electronics, even though we can't seem to grasp it. Encourage us to do Facebook and emails. Call us sometimes. Text us often. Send us photos. Visit us. And then she has, in all capital letters, answer your phone when we call. We do like to hear your voice. Well, you know, technology is just like money. It's amoral. It's neither good nor it's bad. It simply depends on whose hands it is. And let me tell you, technology is a great thing that can be used. I am so thankful that we have the projector system. I'm so thankful that we have these mics. And I'm so thankful that we can communicate through text and one call and all those kinds of things. They are fabulous things. Hebrews chapter 13 verse 5 says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God says, never will I leave you, nor will I forsake you. The only thing that we can take to heaven with us is people. Also, here's a second piece of advice for those of you who are younger, and that is develop a heart of service over entitlement. I think a lot of times that young people just expect things to be handed to them. Understand that you've got to work for them. Understand that you're not going to get them right away. That you need to be grateful for what you have, and you don't have the work ethic, and you need the work ethic that matches it. There's a recurring theme among our older folks, and that is be grateful for what you receive. I sit up and take notice because we have a number of older folks in our church who are grateful and who are super servants and who knock themselves out serving people regardless of whether they get any attention for it. It is important that we as young people learn to serve like many of these who have served before us and who are serving now. It's important that we understand waiting. It's important that we understand patience. There was a story about a lady a church was building on, and she said, she was an older lady, and she says, my heart, my desire, and she came to the leadership, and she says, is that we have the cleanest construction area. And for 3 years, this addition went on. And for 3 years, her and her team made sure that place was spick and span. In fact, they found her one night at 1 a.m. in the morning up there on a scaffolding because a piece of plastic had fallen down and she didn't have time to get it. He says, I reached over into my bank account, into my savings account, and I pulled the $150 and I gave it. Delayed gratification for the purpose of the kingdom. The older generation has taught us that over and over and over again, and we as younger people, we need to learn that. The Sermon on the Mount in verse 31 says, do not worry, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Psalm chapter 46 and verse 10 says, be still and know that I am God. Some of the hardest things to do is just to depend upon God for our very basic needs. And saying, I will serve you first with everything that I have. Not only did you know that students realize their need for godly wisdom by older examples? Then let me tell you, it is something that we can learn from them. Matthew chapter were coming in the next morning, and she climbed up on a scaffolding, and she was protecting some of the stained glass windows. And she said, I just desire that we have a clean place. Service. And story after story of years of service. Mark chapter 10 verse 45, for even the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many. What was very interesting, at the end of this whole construction thing, they brought Miss Mary forward. And as Miss Mary was standing up front, and they were giving her applause for everything that she had done and giving her recognition, she said, they asked her if she'd like to say something. She said yes. And she says, it was not for you, but it was for Him. We have a lot that we can learn from the older generation. and serving. Another thing that we can learn is to learn to practice delayed gratification. In Matthew chapter 6, the Sermon on the Mount, in verse 31, he says, "Do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them." Well, I have learned a lot from my grandfather living with me. 91 years old. And I'm so glad he wasn't here this morning. But over this last year and a half, it's been interesting to watch. Because as the year and a half has gone on, he has included me more and more, and is needing my help in dealing with his finances and his bills and his life and different things like that. Even to the point, he said the other day, he slid a check in front of me, he says, "You better sign it, they need to start getting used to your signature." Well, what was interesting and what I've learned is that, man, he told me a story. He says, I was a young man. He says, this was a long time ago. He says, I was pushing lawnmowers all over the hills of Ottumwa trying to feed 4 young children in my household. He said, I had $150 saved. He said, there was a need that arose. Jesus telling us, but seek ye first the kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Fourthly and finally this morning, respect the past. Respect the past. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. Listen, my sons, to a father's instructions. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son of my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. And then he taught me and said to me, take hold of my words with all of your heart, and keep my commandments, and you will live. Seek the counsel of people who have been around you a lot longer. They've got wise things to say. It may not apply 100% to today's world, but you can make it apply if you'll just pay attention. Because that wisdom that is at the very base of it transcends the time, transcends the scenario. One senior adult said, if you send us a letter asking us to financially support you on your mission trip, and we do, then please at least write a brief note of appreciation and show your gratefulness. And respect was a term that continued to pop up over and over. And I would hope that every generation would realize that there will always be differences in generations, and I think we understand it. It's important to understand, years and years, when some of us was growing up, the hot button issue was the length in the church of a guy's hair and the miniskirts of the girls that they wore. And then along came, well, can you have facial hair or not? Well, it's okay to have a mustache but not a beard. Well, and the list goes on, and things have changed over time. But the Bible and modesty always have to be a determining factor when it comes to styles and fashion. But it would be foolish to never look to the past and learn from it, to never value the good things. However, it would also be equally foolish to so value the past that we never move into the future. And I've heard this said many times, and I want to share it with you. Death comes when our memories of the past supersedes our vision for the future. I loved what I opened up with in the fact that Caleb, at the age of 85, was still looking forward to the future. He honored the past and he honored what was happening there, and he says this, but I'm still ready to go. And so I want to encourage you, older generation, thank you for your service. Thank you for teaching us some of these things. And we still need you, and we still ask you to continue to serve by our side and to teach us and to encourage us. And may we love you, may we respect you, because when we do all of these kinds of things, it becomes a catalyst of spiritual revival. Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12 says, do not let anyone look on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech and conduct and love and faith and purity. Our culture desperately needs young Christians who are serious about their faith. young parents who are serious about teaching it to their children, children who are serious about learning about Jesus Christ. It's desperate in need of teenagers who will say, I will be different than everyone else. The older folks in our church who responded to the survey were very candid when many said that they wish they would have been bolder in their faith from the start in their teen years and in their college years. This morning, I want to give to you, and I want to beg with you, and I want to plead with you that we be a church that honors both generations, both sides, because everyone has so much great opportunities, such great moments of service, something that they can bring to the table. And Paul tells Timothy about him being young and how him serving. And there also, too, there's so many things of example of men like Caleb that has showed us what can happen around here. And so next week we're going to start talking about age to age. We're going to start talking about the younger generation. But also, too, I want to let you know that as eldership, we've put Matt in charge of our older generation, of our mature generation. And we believe that Matt will do a good job with that. And we're looking at as a church to start doing some ministries that are focused around our senior citizens, or the young at heart, as Bill says, or the Joy Club, as someone else says, or whatever you want to call ourselves. And I'm not defining where that defining line is. I'll let you define that. Well, let me tell you, I believe that Matt will do a good job with that. And he's going to